Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're tackling the DEA's Pharmacist's Manual.
Oh, yeah. Get ready, it's a wild ride.
I'm excited to really get into the weeds of this. We've got excerpts galore and...
More than you can shake a stick at, that's for sure.
Seriously. But it's so important, right?
Yeah.
Getting beyond just picking up a prescription.
Right. Understanding what pharmacists deal with every single day.
There's a whole hidden world behind that counter.
Absolutely. It's not just handing out pills. It's a huge responsibility.
Exactly. Keeping people safe, making sure medications don't end up in the wrong hands. It's
a huge system. And it all starts with how we even classify these substances.
Yeah, let's talk about this whole schedule thing.
Oh, the schedules. It's like a rating system, but for drugs.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, your G, your PG-13, and then bam, your R-rated drugs. Schedule I...
The most dangerous.
The big guns, high potential for abuse, no accepted medical use. Think heroin.
LSD, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So those are super tightly controlled.
Makes sense. But then where do prescription meds fall in all of this?
That's where things get interesting. Schedule 2, still highly addictive.
But they do have medical uses.
Right, like fentanyl, oxycodone, powerful painkillers, serious business.
So are you telling me some common meds are in that same category as these hardcore opioids?
It might surprise you, but yes. Even some ADHD meds, like Adderall,
Wow.
Schedule 2, highlights that potential for abuse even with legit prescriptions.
So pharmacists are walking a tightrope.
Oh, big time. Making sure the right people get the meds, but preventing diversion. It's
A lot of pressure.
And don't forget the tracking. Every single pill.
It's like every transaction documented.
Oh, yeah, everyone. You can imagine the paperwork. Not too long ago, it was triplicate forms for every Schedule Higher 2 drug.
Oh, man, my head is spinning.
Mountains of paperwork.
So pharmacists need to be part pharmacist, part detective, huh?
You got that right. Always on the lookout for red flags, potential diversion. And it starts way before dispensing.
Oh, right, with the pharmacy registration itself.
Exactly. It's not just open for business, it's a whole process.
You need a state license, then go through the DEA.
Oh, yeah, the DEA registration,
Okay.
background checks, inspections, the whole 9 yards.
They don't mess around.
Nope. Got to make sure that pharmacy can handle these substances responsibly.
So every single location, even in the same chain, needs its own registration.
That's right. Each one individually registered with the DEA.
Wow, that really emphasizes the accountability.
Big time. And speaking of accountability, let's not forget inventory.
Oh, man. So are we talking counting every single pill?
You bet. Well, for those Schedule 3 through V...
Those are the low-risk ones.
Right. Those, they can estimate for open bottles under 1,000 pills.
Oh, okay. So there's a little shortcut there.
A little one. But for those Schedule 2, every single one. Count them up.
Wow, intense.
And that's just the tip of the paperwork iceberg.
Right. What other records are we talking about here?
Everything. Invoices, dispensing logs, the prescriptions themselves, and each one with its own rules.
So beyond the actual prescription slips, what else is there?
Well, you got your invoices for those Schedule 3 through Vs, then those logs for, those rare times they dispense without a prescription.
Wait, hold on. They can dispense controlled substances without a prescription?
Yeah, in very specific situations, like certain cough syrups with codeine.
Okay, so those ones behind the counter.
Right. But even then, strict rules. Can't sell more than a certain amount in 48 hours. Gotta verify age.
Gotta be 18 or older.
And of course, meticulous records of every transaction.
Wow, so even those seemingly simple transactions, it's not simple at all.
Not at all. Layers of regulation. And remember that 2-year rule for record keeping applies to those too.
Wow, it really is all about accountability.
Every step of the way. Now let's talk prescriptions themselves.
Okay, so what makes a prescription valid in the eyes of the DEA?
So first off, it has to be for a legit medical purpose.
Okay, that makes sense.
And issued by, a licensed practitioner.
Doing their normal doctor thing.
Exactly. Acting in the usual course of their practice. But what about those phone-in prescriptions?
Yeah, does that throw a wrench in things?
That's where authorized agents come in. A practitioner can designate someone.
To call in prescriptions.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are limitations.
So sometimes a phone call just won't cut it.
Exactly. For example, an agent can't call in a Schedule 2.
Not even in an emergency.
Not even then. In a real emergency, the practitioner themselves has to call the pharmacist directly.
Wow, seriously?
Serious. And even then, they got to provide a written prescription within 7 days. Signed, dated, the whole shebang.
Embassy safeguards.
Got to maintain that chain of accountability. And pharmacists are right there on the front lines.
Making sure everything's legit.
Exactly. Got to verify everything. The DEA number, patient info, make sure it all adds up.
They do need those detective skills. But are there ever times when faxing a Schedule II is allowed?
That's a great question. And it might surprise you, but there are actually 3 exceptions.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So first, for residents of long-term care facilities, fax Schedule II can actually be the original.
Interesting. What about the others?
Hospice patients is the second one.
Makes sense.
And lastly, if the Schedule II narcotic is for a specific way of administering it, like intravenous, intramuscular.
So injections and things like that.
Right. Then a fax can be the original.
Wow. So much nuance.
It's amazing. And pharmacists have to stay up to date on all of it.
To make sure they're dispensing safely and legally.
Absolutely.
Oh.
So we've talked prescriptions, but what about the actual dispensing process?
Right. What does that look like?
Well, every dispensed prescription needs a label with all the key info. Date, pharmacy name and address, prescription number, patient name, prescriber name.
Directions, cautionary statements, all that jazz.
You got it. And of course, that caution, federal law prohibits transfer statement.
The classic.
The one and only.
FDA mandated. Got to be on the Schedule II, 3s and 4s. So lots of labeling. But once it's filled, can they just hand it to anyone? Like if I need to pick up my partner's prescription.
Good question. So they can't just hand it to anyone. It has to be the patient or, someone in their household.
So no picking up a friend's prescription?
Nope. That's considered distributing, not dispensing.
Yeah.
Pharmacists can't do that.
Got it. Another layer of protection.
Exactly. And for Schedule II, even stricter, of course.
Right, because those are the highly addictive ones.
No refills on those. Every time, new prescription from the doctor.
Okay, that makes sense.
But what about when a patient needs less than what's prescribed? Can they do partial fills on Schedule II?
I didn't even think about that.
There are specific cases, like terminally ill patients or those in long-term care facilities.
There's some flexibility built in.
Right. But meticulous documentation is key. Date, amount dispensed, what's left authorized, pharmacist's ID.
Wow, so much documentation.
It's all about accountability,
Mm-hmm.
preventing diversion, patient safety. And speaking of safety, let's talk security.
Right, because these controlled substances are prime targets for theft, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Huge responsibility to safeguard them. So there are strict employment rules.
Okay, like what?
Can't hire anyone with a felony related to controlled substances or past DEA registration issues.
That keeps those bad apples out.
Exactly. But what if, even with precautions, there's a theft or significant loss?
Oh, no. What happens then?
More paperwork? They have to report it immediately to the DEA using a DEA Form 106.
No time to waste.
Not at all. And they gotta include everything. Date, type of theft, what's missing, even identifying marks on the containers.
Wow, so they don't mess around.
Not when it comes to controlled substances. And there's a whole process to determine what's significant loss.
So it's not just the number of pills.
Nope. Type of drug, patterns of loss, even local trends and diversion, it's all considered.
So pharmacists are part loss prevention specialists, too.
You could say that. Always vigilant, always proactive.
There really is a whole world behind that counter. We've only just started, too.
Oh, we've just scratched the surface. So much more to explore about the roles and responsibilities.
I can't wait to dive in deeper. So we've talked about all the rules for dispensing and securing these meds, but what about when people need to get rid of old medications? Like, I have to admit, I've always just flushed them down the toilet. Is that bad?
It might seem harmless, but flushing meds down the toilet, really bad idea.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Those drugs can end up contaminating water supplies,
Oh, wow.
harming the environment. Not good.
So what is the right way to get rid of unwanted medications, especially those controlled substances?
That's where the DEA's authorized collector program comes in.
Okay.
It allows certain places like pharmacies to collect those medications for safe and proper disposal.
Okay, so pharmacies are stepping up to help people get rid of their old meds responsibly. How does that work?
So pharmacies can apply to become authorized collectors.
Okay.
And once they're approved, they can set up these secure collection receptacles.
So like a special drop box for old meds?
Exactly. They're tamper-proof, securely locked, and permanently attached. So they can't just walk away.
Makes sense.
And there are strict procedures for removing and transferring those collected substances.
Okay.
For ultimate destruction, it's all very carefully controlled.
Wow. So it's not just about providing a box, it's a whole system
It is, with checks and balances.
to make sure those drugs are disposed of properly.
You got it. And there's another option. Pharmacies can also partner with authorized reverse distributors
Okay.
who run mail-back programs.
So like a prepaid envelope I could get from my pharmacy to mail in my old meds.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Makes safe disposal even more accessible and convenient.
Right.
And it's a great way for pharmacies to actively contribute to combating the opioid epidemic, which is,
A bigger concern these days, for sure.
a big one. Speaking of which, this manual has a whole section about the Combat Methamphetamine Epidemic Act.
The CMEA. I had no idea. Pharmacies were on the front lines of that fight, too.
Oh, absolutely. The CMEA was enacted to curb the illegal production of methamphetamine.
Right.
And a big part of that involves regulating the sale of those over-the-counter medications that contain certain chemicals used to make it.
Okay, so we're talking about those medications you usually find behind the pharmacy counter, even though you don't need a prescription.
Exactly. Things like pseudoephedrine,
Oh, yeah.
which is a common ingredient in decongestants,
Right.
are now tightly regulated thanks to the CMEA.
So even buying allergy meds has become way more regulated.
It has, and for good reason. The CMEA has made a significant impact on reducing the availability of these chemicals
Okay.
for illegal meth production, and pharmacists play a vital role in enforcing these regulations.
So I'm seeing a theme here. Pharmacists are responsible for so much more than just filling prescriptions.
You got that right. They're like gatekeepers,
And
making sure
yeah.
medications are used safely and responsibly in so many different ways.
They really are. And they're also involved in helping people who are struggling with addiction.
Oh, absolutely.
So they're not just dispensing potentially addictive drugs, they're also helping people who are already struggling with addiction.
That's right. Pharmacies can play a key role in dispensing buprenorphine,
Okay.
which is a medication used to treat opioid addiction.
That makes a lot of sense, but I imagine there are specific regulations around that as well.
Oh, you better believe it. On top of being registered with the DEA to dispense controlled substances, they also have to make sure the prescriber meets certain qualifications,
Okay.
like having the appropriate training and certification to prescribe buprenorphine for addiction treatment.
Another layer of checks and balances.
Exactly. It's all about working together, pharmacists and prescribers, to
Right.
make sure the patient is getting the best possible care while also upholding all those necessary regulations.
So you've covered a lot here. Schedules, prescriptions, security disposal, even addiction treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else about pharmacy operations that this manual dives into?
Well, there's a whole section dedicated to a unique type of pharmacy,
Yeah.
a central fill pharmacy.
A central fill pharmacy. I've never heard of that.
So imagine like a behind-the-scenes hub
Okay.
for filling prescriptions.
Okay.
A central fill pharmacy doesn't actually interact directly with patients.
Interesting.
Instead, it partners with a retail pharmacy to help process and fill prescriptions.
So it's like a prescription factory working behind the scenes.
Exactly. A retail pharmacy can send a valid prescription to a central fill pharmacy,
Okay.
which then prepares and packages the medication and sends it back to the retail pharmacy for dispensing to the patient.
That sounds pretty efficient.
It can be, but of course there are regulations governing this entire process.
Of course there are.
The retail pharmacy and the central fill pharmacy have to have a contractual relationship or share a common owner, and they have to follow all those usual rules about record keeping, labeling, security, and everything else we've talked about.
So same rules, different location.
Exactly. And this even applies to transporting those filled prescriptions. If a central fill pharmacy uses a private carrier to transport medications to a retail pharmacy, they're responsible for reporting any loss during shipping to the DEA.
So if those pills go missing in transit, it's on the central fill pharmacy to report it.
That's right. And if a retail pharmacy hires a carrier to pick up those filled prescriptions from a central fill pharmacy, they then become responsible for reporting any loss that occurs after they take custody of the shipment.
So it's like a relay race of responsibility,
It is.
making sure those controlled substances are accounted for every step of the way.
That's a great analogy. It really highlights how every step of the process from filling to transporting is carefully regulated and monitored.
Okay, so we've talked about central fill pharmacies, but what about settings where patients live, like long-term care facilities? How does pharmacy fit into those environments?
That's an important aspect to consider. LTCFs have their own set of rules and procedures when it comes to controlled substances.
Okay.
And pharmacists play a crucial role in making sure those rules are followed.
I'm all ears. What kind of rules are we talking about?
Well, for starters, controlled substances in a LTCF have to be stored super securely, either in a locked cabinet or dispersed among non-controlled medications. And when it comes to actually administering those medications to residents, every single dose needs to be documented.
So there's even more emphasis on accountability in those settings where patients are more vulnerable.
Absolutely. Pharmacists often work closely with LTCF staff to educate them about these regulations
Okay.
and make sure they're handling and documenting those controlled substances correctly.
So they're not just filling prescriptions, they're almost like consultants, helping these facilities navigate all of this.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of navigating complexities, let's talk about those emergency kits that LTCFs often have on hand.
You mean like pre-assembled kits with essential medications they can use in emergencies?
Exactly. But when those kits contain controlled substances, there are specific rules about how they're stored, accessed, and replenished.
Okay, what kind of rules?
Well, each kit has to be sealed with a tamper-evident seal. It can only be opened in a true emergency, and any missing medication has to be documented and reported to the pharmacy.
So it's like breaking the glass in case of emergency, but with a whole lot of paperwork afterward.
Exactly. And the pharmacy is responsible for maintaining a record of all the medications in that kit, including their expiration dates. They also need to make sure the kit is replenished promptly after any use.
It sounds like a lot of coordination and communication
It is.
between the pharmacy and the LTCF staff.
It definitely is, and it really highlights the pharmacist's role in ensuring continuity of care, even in those emergency situations.
We've covered central fill pharmacies
Yeah.
and LTCFs. Are there any other unique pharmacy settings that this manual addresses?
There's actually a section about how hospitals handle medications that patients bring in with them.
You mean like when someone's admitted and brings their own meds from home?
Exactly. The manual emphasizes that those medications should be identified and documented right away when the patient is admitted.
So it's all about minimizing any risk of medication errors and maintaining accountability even when those meds come from outside the hospital.
Precisely. It all circles back to that central theme we've been discussing, the pharmacist's role as a gatekeeper, ensuring the safe and appropriate use of medications in all these different settings.
It's really eye-opening to see how much more there is to pharmacy than just filling prescriptions.
It truly is. The DEA's Pharmacist's Manual does a fantastic job of laying out the vast responsibilities and complexities of this profession.
Okay, before we wrap up our deep dive into this Pharmacist Manual, I have to ask about online pharmacies.
Oh, yeah.
They're everywhere these days, but I have to admit I'm a little wary of them. Are they even addressed in this manual?
They are. In fact, there's a whole section on the Ryan Haight Online Pharmacy Consumer Protection Act.
Okay, so there are rules.
Oh, yeah. It was specifically enacted to regulate selling controlled substances online.
That's reassuring. So what kind of rules? Is it the Wild West out there, or are there actual safeguards?
Definitely not the Wild West. They got to follow a lot of the same rules as brick-and-mortar pharmacies and then some.
Okay, makes sense.
Like any other pharmacy, they need to be registered with the DEA.
Right, but is that enough, or are there like extra hoops since they're online?
You're right. There are more. They need a special modification to their DEA registration specifically to operate as an online pharmacy.
So it's not as simple as just setting up a website and selling meds.
Not at all. They got to meet very specific requirements, like notifying the DEA about which states they're licensed to dispense in and making sure their website clearly displays certain declarations.
So transparency is key.
Big time. They can't just ship meds anywhere in the world.
Right, because that was one of my concerns. Like, are they even following the rules?
Exactly. They got to comply with all the state licensing requirements in every single state they dispense to.
That's a big deal.
It is. One of the main concerns with those, less reputable online pharmacies.
Right, the ones that give you the heebie-jeebies.
Exactly. Is that they might be operating outside the rules, and that puts patients at risk.
So it sounds like they've tried to close those loopholes.
They have. So beyond registration and licensing, what else does this Ryan Haight Act cover?
Yeah, what else is in there?
Well, one of the most important things is that it requires a valid prescription for any controlled substance dispensed online.
Okay.
No filling prescriptions based on just a quick online questionnaire or a virtual consult.
Right.
There has to be a legitimate doctor-patient relationship established offline, just like with a traditional pharmacy.
So those websites that promise quick and easy prescriptions for anything are a big no-no.
Huge red flag. A legitimate online pharmacy will require a valid prescription from a licensed practitioner, just like your local pharmacy.
No shortcuts.
Nope. It seems like they really thought through the potential problems with online prescribing.
They did. Are there any other requirements for online pharmacies that stand out?
One more key thing is they got to very clearly display a statement on their website outlining their compliance with the Ryan Haight Act.
Okay. And this statement has to include the pharmacy's name, exactly as it appears on their official DEA certificate of registration.
So again, transparency is key.
Absolutely. Consumers need to be able to easily check that an online pharmacy is legit and operating within the law.
Right. It's about empowering people to make good choices.
Exactly. Because not all online pharmacies are created equal.
That's for sure. It's amazing how this manual covers it all, from the traditional neighborhood pharmacy to this whole world of online dispensing.
It really does. It shows how important pharmacists are no matter how people are getting their meds.
It does. For me, the biggest takeaway is the sheer amount of responsibility that pharmacists have.
That's a lot.
Especially when it comes to controlled substances, they're really on the front lines of preventing diversion and making sure those meds are used safely.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has given me a whole new appreciation for what pharmacists do.
Me too.
It's so much more than just counting pills and filling bottles.
Yeah.
So much more. And it makes you think, with all the changes in technology and healthcare, how will the role of the pharmacist evolve?
That's a great question. And for our listeners, if you're as intrigued as we are, we encourage you to check out the DEA's Pharmacist Manual for yourselves,
It's surprisingly interesting.
even if you're not a pharmacist. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the DEA's Pharmacist Manual.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious and informed.